Chairman of the Donald W. Reynolds Foundation, Mr. Fred W. Smith, the Regent of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, Mrs. Ann Bookout, the President and CEO of Mount Vernon, Mr. Curtis G. Viebranz, Pulitzer Prize-winning author, Mr. David Mccullough, and the founding director of the Fred W. Smith National Library for the Study of George Washington, Dr. Douglas Bradburn. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we would ask that you please rise for the presentation of the colors by the United States Army's Continental Color Guard. Ladies and gentlemen, the national anthem of the United States of America, performed by the United States Army Band under the direction of First Lieutenant Silas Huff, with vocal accompaniment by Sergeant First Class Leanne Hinton.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
And now would you please join us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, led by students from nearby Fort Belvoir Elementary School.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. And now to offer this morning's invocation, the Reverend Dr. Donald D. Binder, rector of the historic Pohick Church, where George Washington served as vestryman for 22 years and where he and his family often worshiped.
Heavenly Father, on this day, we give you thanks for the life and legacy of the father of our country, your servant, George Washington. We thank you especially for the realization of his dream today in the grand opening of a national library to house his public and private papers, many of which were so prominent in our nation's founding. With gratitude for sustaining all those who have worked so hard to make this dream a reality, we pray that you may transform this new library into a vital center of learning. that it will become a place where we not only increase our knowledge of our founding father, but also learn from his wisdom. That it will become a center devoted not only to a study of the past, but also towards the learning of lessons for our future. That it will become not only a treasure house for scholars, but a beacon of blessing for all your people. And because General and Mrs. Washington cared so deeply about the welfare of all citizens, we pause to remember before you those who have recently lost their lives or suffered grievous injury in our nation's capital, as well as around our country and in the distant reaches of the world. Pour out your saving grace upon the victims and your gracious comfort upon their families and loved ones. And extend your holy protection to all those whose service to our country continues to place them in harm's way. And for all your people, especially to those gathered here, we pray that we may find the grace to heed your immortal call to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our Creator, and so foster for ourselves and our world the blessings of liberty and peace. Amen.
And now we welcome the 10th President of George Washington's Mount Vernon, Mr. Curt Viebranz.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. On behalf of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association and all of us here at Mount Vernon, I extend a warm welcome to all of you to the much anticipated opening of the Fred W. Smith National Library for the study of George Washington at Mount Vernon. We've been blessed with a cool and calm and almost sunny day for this special day, and we have much to be thankful for. Many of you have heard me say that this is a defining moment, indeed a transforming moment in the life of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. Moments like these, even in the 160-year history of the association, are surely very rare. And so today, in the presence of current and former members of the board of the Ladies Association, whose terms of service span almost 40 years, we salute the ladies for their vision, their perspicacity, and their wise and thrifty stewardship of resources in furthering the legacy of George Washington. For without you all, we would not be here this morning. And all of us here at Mount Vernon are deeply grateful to all of you. And to all of you in the I deviate from the script as well to be sure everyone knows that this building was supported by more than 7,000 Americans. People wrote small checks and large checks, but it's just an incredible testament to the deep feeling that the American people have for the first President of the United States. So I thank all of you who are here today. All of us, including the ladies, say thank you, thank you, thank you for all you've done to make this day possible. Thank you. We gather today to celebrate the father of our country. And in the lead up to the opening, I've had the chance to tell the story of the ladies and the library and of George Washington to members of the media. And earlier this week, one member of the press asked me, why do we call George Washington the father of our country? And my answer was quite simple. Without George Washington, this free republic, marked by popular sovereignty, would likely not exist. This exceptional nation might not be what it is today. Washington was called upon time and again to lead, first as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, then presiding over the Constitutional Convention, and finally as the twice unanimously elected President of the United States. And yet, what defined him most was his repeated and steadfast desire to give up power in the larger interest of our nation. Upon his return to Mount Vernon after leaving the presidency, Washington wrote a letter to his former Secretary of War, Dr. James McHenry, in which he said, "I have not houses to build except one, which I must erect for the accommodation and security of my military, civil, and private papers, which are voluminous and may be of interest. You will have heard this passage a number of times, but I will repeat it again today so that we can remember that what we have done here grants Washington his wish nearly 214 years later. And I know the General would want to join me in thanking you all as well, so thank you very much. This library presents a unique opportunity at a critical moment in our nation's history. We intend to foster scholarship, the exchange of ideas about Washington and the founding era, and to deliver relevant and timely messages to future generations of Americans. We now have the will and the means to convey these lessons to millions around the world. And with our proximity to our nation's capital, this library will be a place where our leaders can gather for nonpartisan civil discourse on our nation's opportunities and challenges. Again, we are honored to have you all here this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to make a few special introductions. First, representing the international community, His Excellency John E. Beale, the Ambassador of Barbados to the United States. And His Excellency Nuno Brito, the Ambassador of the Portuguese Republic to the United States. I'd also like to acknowledge those among us who have given or give now valuable public service here in the U.S. Fairfax County Supervisor Jerry Highland, members of the Virginia General Assembly, Delegate Scott Survell, and Senators Toddy Puller, Adam Edmond, and former Senator Emily Miller. The Archivist of the United States, David Ferrier, with whom we've already built a very strong and enduring partnership, which we're grateful for. The President of Washington College, Dr. Mitchell Reese and Mrs. Reese. President of the George Washington University, Dr. Stephen Knapp. First Lady of Wisconsin, Mrs. Scott Walker. The former Governor of Tennessee, Winfield Dunn and Mrs. Dunn. The former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich and Mrs. Gingrich. Former U.S. Senator and current Mount Vernon advisor, John Warner and Mrs. Warner. Former Governor, U.S. Senator, Secretary of the Interior, and current Mount Vernon advisor, Dirk Kempthorne. And finally, former Governor, former U.S. Senator, George Allen and Mrs. Allen. And now it gives me great pleasure to invite Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine to come forward to share their thoughts. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Mark Warner, United States Senator from Virginia and the 69th Governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you. Friends of Mount Vernon, good morning. I was going to go through that same litany of acknowledgments. I also want to acknowledge Governor McDonnell as well, but that would take up too much of my 4 minutes. But let me say, as we were gathering, I understand while Washington thought long and hard about a place for his papers, it has truly been a long time in coming. But my understanding is that the actual vision, fundraising, construction, and completion of this library took place in just 4 years. So I want to add my special thanks as well to Fred Smith, the Reynolds Foundation, the Mars family, and the wonderful, wonderful ladies of Mount Vernon. Congratulations. You know, at the tender age of 16, George Washington is said to have produced a famous guide. It was called The Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation. Now, several of young Washington's rules are extremely lofty, such as this one. Quote, labor to keep alive in your breast that little spark of celestial fire called conscience. But as you might imagine, a teenager of 16, and I say this is the father of 3 daughters about that age, needed near the end of his 110 list of do's and don'ts, his civility became a little less poetic and a lot more prosaic. For instance, he wrote, "Cleanse not your teeth with a tablecloth, napkin, fork, or knife." Still good advice. Now, it is certainly possible that young George Washington's rules of civility were little more than an exercise in penmanship assigned by his teacher. But regardless, today I will choose to follow Washington's rule number 35. Let your discourse with men of business be short yet comprehensive. You know, so much of our history is tied up in the legacy of George Washington. He placed his face on the quarter, the dollar bill. His name's attached to countless streets and towns, great universities. And while his bust adorns countless pedestals, I might suggest that we, particularly those of us who serve in my line of business, might have forgotten some of the lessons that he can still teach us who live and work in the capital just 14 miles away. In December of 1778, then General Washington traveled from his Army's camp in White Plains, New York, to visit the city of New York, or city of Philadelphia. Washington, when he got to Philadelphia, was apparently amazed, if not frankly angered, by the relative comfort and luxury afforded by the citizens of Philadelphia, while his ragtag army was in much, much more distress. Washington was also unhappy about what he saw as the petty conflicts which were preoccupying Congress. So again, he wrote in a letter to a friend, a letter I'm sure that will be here in this great library, quote, "Party disputes and personal quarrels are the great business of the day, whilst the momentous concerns of an empire, a great and accumulated debt, ruined finances, depreciated money, and want of credit are but secondary considerations which are postponed from day to day and week to week." 235 years ago. 235 years ago, those words could not be more true today. And I promise not to give you the whole lecture on our $17 trillion debt that goes up by $4 billion a day. But rest assured that too often we do continue to postpone day to day and week to week some of the common sense solutions that could put this issue behind us. And unfortunately, Tim Kaine and I will not be able to stay for the whole ceremony because we have to go vote on some of these matters a little bit later today. Now, to be sure, any historian will tell you that George Washington was a fiscal conservative. He urged us to spend and borrow sparingly rather than placing a burden on future generations. But he also did not despise taxation. He called it unpleasant but vital. Trying to get those balances right is just one example of the kind of leadership that Washington provided for our nation at its outset, and what scholars, students, and hopefully those of us who serve in public service will have a chance to come to this library and learn from. And whether it is about our finances, whether it's about leadership, whether it is about, as has been already mentioned, the willingness to give up power, then is now Washington's reminder of our shared commitments to the principles and institutions of free government are one of his greatest legacies. That is the example and the legacy that we honor today. And again, one that I'll try to take back to the Capitol later today. So again, to the ladies, to the donors, to the friends, to all who made this vision and this dream of Washington finally become a reality, congratulations. And for all of you who've come from all over our great country, welcome to the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you so much.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Tim Kaine, United States Senator from Virginia and the 70th Governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you so very much, and good morning. What a beautiful day and a wonderful occasion. I want to offer my additional congratulations to my longtime friend, Mark Warners, and just add and say that to the ladies and to Mr. Smith and all the donors, this is a remarkable thing you have done. And Mount Vernon is really experiencing a remarkable new chapter of vitality in our nation's life. If you think about the opening of both the Visitor Center and this library in the last 10 years, you can see that this is an institution built to last that has so much to offer in the days ahead, and I'm thrilled to be part of it. You have not only the sitting governor of Virginia, Governor McDonnell here, but three of the 8 former governors, Mark Warner, myself, and George Allen. I think we have the feeling that while we might not recommend public office even to our kids or friends, if you have to be in public office, you should be in public office in Virginia, because we have so many opportunities like this, and we care very, very deeply about our history. One of the most eloquent writers about history was a Mississippi novelist, William Faulkner, but we kind of claim him in Virginia because he taught at the University of Virginia for a while. And Faulkner has a number of great comments about history. First, he said, "The past is not dead. In fact, the past isn't even past." But the one I like best is Faulkner's description of history. History is the effort to create a usable past. If it's just about the past, there might be an interest to scholars and a tiny group of people. But if you make history about the effort to create a usable past, use it today, use it tomorrow, then it really assumes an excitement, and that's what this library is about. We have an interesting Senate tradition. In February of every year, a senator, alternating in party year to year, takes the Senate floor and reads to the body George Washington's farewell address to Congress. Now, there have been many great speeches in American life. The second inaugural of Lincoln, or his Gettysburg Address, President Roosevelt's address to Congress at the start of the Second World War, President Kennedy's inaugural, or you could think of the Martin Luther King speech, but there's only one speech that is read every year to the Senate of the United States, and it's George Washington's advice to Congress as he departed. I didn't think of that as an applause line, but it's an applause line. It's an applause line. The reason it's read every year is it's like a crystal that has, 360 degrees. You hear it every year, and you grab onto something new and different in that same speech. It's so powerful. The speech warns of the dangers of partisanship. It warns of the dangers of regional factionalism. It warns of problems of profligate spending or not being willing to embrace necessary taxation. It warns us to avoid entanglements or wars on foreign soil, and it encourages us to engage in commerce with nations around the world. These are all positive traits, but the thing that is the most positive, that is constant year after year, and you always notice, is the humility of the speech. And that is something that we need. Humility is a precondition, I believe, to listening and compromise, and that is what George Washington offers us today, and it is what we so desperately need. The vote that Senator Warren and I are going to cast is a vote of all things to try to keep government open. The lessons of Washington in this library, it's about that usable past, a past that we can use going forward, and he has so much to offer us. So again, I say congratulations and thanks for the opportunity to be with you for a few minutes today. I'll steal words from another president and depart in order to go vote so that government by the people, of the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. Thank you.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the 20th Regent of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, Anne Bookout.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly wonderful to look out and see all of you here on this glorious day. Governor and Senators, thank you for your service, your support of Mount Vernon, your commitment to the Commonwealth, and your service to our nation is both impressive and very much appreciated. I would like to take a moment and acknowledge just a few of the many special guests we have with us today. First, I would like to ask the Vice Regents of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association to please stand. In particular, I would like to recognize Claire Edwards from Connecticut. Claire, who chaired our library task force. Gay Gaines from Florida, who chaired our successful Capitol campaign. And Mary Beth Borthwick from California, who chaired this lovely event today. As well as Adrienne Mars, our former Vice Regent from Wyoming, who is our honorary chair. As many of you know, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association was founded in 1853 by Anne Pamela Cunningham, who saved Mount Vernon from ruin by rallying a group of trailblazing women to raise $200,000, which was a considerable sum at the time, to purchase the estate from the Washington family. After both the federal government and the Commonwealth of Virginia passed on the opportunity, Ms. Cunningham was famously quoted as saying, "If the men of America will not save the beloved home of George Washington, the women of America surely will." Thus marked the beginning of not only the Ladies Association, but the birth of the historic preservation movement in America. In the more than 150 years that we have maintained and operated Mount Vernon, we have never accepted a dime of government money. We rely solely on the generosity of patriotic Americans such as yourselves, and thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We have welcomed more than 85 million visitors to Mount Vernon, people from around the world, to our nation's most historic visited home. This library enables us to reach out across the country and across the world to educate millions about George Washington, the indispensable man without whom this nation could not have been created. General Washington led us to independence, presided over the Constitutional Convention, refused to be king, and served 2 terms as president before he left power and came home to his beloved Mount Vernon. That is an example of leadership that we believe is more relevant in today's world than ever before, and this library will help us keep that legacy alive. Thanks to all of you, we will fulfill that mission. I would like to recognize several groups which provide Mount Vernon Ladies Association with support and much needed advice. First, will the members of the Governor's Board of Visitors for Mount Vernon please stand? Thank you. I would like the current and former members of our advisory committee to stand and be recognized. And last, but certainly not least, the members of our Lifeguard Society, the Founders Washington Committee, and the Neighborhood Friends Steering Committee. Would you please stand? Thank you all. We simply could not accomplish all that we do without your support. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce one of the newest members of Mount Vernon's executive team, Dr. Douglas Bradburn, who was recently named founding director of the library. Doug, would you stand? Doug is a professional scholar and a professor of history who is focused on the founding era. He comes to us from the State University of New York at Binghamton. I would like to take a moment to recognize a very important person whose singular leadership and vision pushed this ambitious project forward and who is unable to join us in person today. That would be our former president, Jim Reese. Thank you for joining me in expressing our gratitude to him for his more than 30 years of service to Mount Vernon. I would also like to recognize the very talented team who designed and constructed this building, the architects Air St. Gross, general contractor Whiting Turner, and also MFM Design, as well as Sean Regan. It is both astounding and inspiring to have received so much enthusiastic support for this important campaign. As Curt mentioned earlier, we have more than 7,000 people who step forward to donate to the library and make this day possible. Thank you, each and every one of you. I hope you will take a moment and examine the spectacular list of generous donors. The library's Wall of Honor is just inside the building on the left, as well as the list that's in your program. I wish I could individually recognize everyone, but because of time constraints, I will acknowledge a few of our most generous supporters and ask them to stand and be recognized. I will read their names as they appear on the wall, and please hold your applause until complete. The Donald W. Reynolds Foundation, the Richard and Helen DeVos Foundation, John and Adrian Mars, David M. Rubenstein. David, are you here? Karen Buchwald Wright, Mary Beth and William Harold Borthwick, Sarah Colson, Gay and Stanley N. Gaines, Crawford Taylor Foundation, Donald and Nancy Delasky, Forrest Mars Jr., Robert Plaster Foundation, Richard M. Scaife, who could not be here, the Gordon V. and Helen C. Smith Foundation, and will John Bookout please stand and represent our family? Thank you. Last, but certainly not least, I would like to especially acknowledge Fred W. Smith, the chairman of the Reynolds Foundation. For those of you who do not know, the Donald W. Reynolds Foundation is an organization that has proven to be one of the greatest advocates for teaching the world about the importance of George Washington. The Mount Vernon Ladies Association's relationship with the Reynolds Foundation began nearly over a decade ago, during a time when the Gilbert Stuart's iconic Lansdowne portrait of President Washington, which had been on loan to the Smithsonian Institute, was going to auction. Under the patriotic leadership of Fred Smith and President Steve Anderson, the foundation stepped forward and purchased this national treasure as a gift to the nation. Then, with a gift of almost $24 million, they quickly became the largest donor to our 2006 capital campaign, which created the state-of-the-art Donald W. Reynolds Museum and Education Center. The foundation has also helped in a number of creative ways to reach Americans beyond our walls, including support for the well-visited traveling exhibition, Discovering the Real George Washington, New Views from Mount Vernon, as well as endowing our popular Teachers Institute in 3 states. In 2010, we announced the launch of a capital campaign, headed by Gay Gaines, to fund the Fred W. Smith National Library for the study of George Washington, with their extraordinary lead gift of $38 million. The association is well aware of the Reynolds Foundation's record of awarding gifts to financially sound, efficient, and entrepreneurial nonprofits. And we pledge to do all in our power to make the very best use of what is by far the largest gift in Mount Vernon's history. It is my great pleasure to present the chairman of the Donald W. Reynolds Foundation, who is one of the greatest advocates for America's foremost founding father. Please join me in welcoming Fred W. Smith.
And thank you very much for those wonderful remarks about the foundation myself. They're probably overstated, but we're egotistical people, so we accept them. I would also like to apologize to Senator Warner. Senator Warner was here at the groundbreaking for this wonderful facility, and I made some comments at that time, and he was kind enough to tell me that he thought that I did a good job, particularly when I led off with some funny comment. Well, Senator, at my age, I don't remember what I had for breakfast. I can't remember what I said 2 years ago, but you pretend you do, and let's leave it that way, okay? Also, Curt, I want to thank you. I was here for the dedication of the Donald W. Reynolds Museum and Educational Center, and one of our distinguished speakers, our speaker today, David Mccullough, unfortunately put me on the program after David spoke. I told Jim Reeves if he ever did that again, I would not come back to Mount Vernon. It's certainly an honor for me to say that have my name associated in any way with the father of our country is a great honor. And certainly being here today with all of you people and donors, it's a great honor just for that. But I would like to thank my fellow trustees for approving this grant and making this all possible. They're all here with us today, and I'd like for them to stand, but I appreciate it if you gave them no applause because they're tough enough to deal with, and I don't want them to have their ego raised in it. First, we have Wes Smith, who's the vice chairman of the board, Steve Anderson, who's our president, trustees, Dr. John Smith, Neil Pendergraph, Barbara Campbell, and Dr. Keith Bowman. Not too much. And I will also thank you for the outstanding leadership in creation of this remarkable new facility. I know that you and the rest of the ladies from the Mount Vernon Ladies Association have a huge investment of time and effort in the completion of this structure. And it's certainly a magnificent structure. And I'm getting too old to turn the pages. I also want to thank all of you other donors who stepped up to the challenge and helped meet the campaign financial goal. I couldn't let this day pass without giving a special thanks to someone, I'm sorry to say, is unable to be with us today, Jim Reeves. Jim Reeves had not invited us to tour Mount Vernon over 12 years ago. We have not been involved in any of the projects that the foundation has funded during this time. Jim made a comment to me during our visit that had really struck home. He told us that the most recent American history text, there was more allocated to Marilyn Monroe than there was George Washington. I don't know how Jim knew that. I never asked him, but I just took him at his word. That was an alarming trend that we wanted to see turn around. During the past 12 years, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, under Jim's leadership, has expanded the visitor experience on the grounds here at Mount Vernon, reached out for numerous traveling exhibits and educational programs and for school-aged children across the country, and have now come full circle with this beautiful library that will be a venue for scholarly research, leadership conferences, and a home for original historical documents, manuscripts, and books from President Washington's collection. We are told that the President envisioned a structure for his documents here on the grounds of Mount Vernon. Unfortunately, he was not able to complete that project before his death. Today, nearly 214 years after his passing, we are able to celebrate the opening of his library. If he were here today, I believe that he would be pleased with the completion of his dream. It's a testament to his legacy that all of this was accomplished without any financial help from any government entity. Completion of the capital campaign has not only funded the structure that you see here today, but also the long-term maintenance of these facilities and the endowment of the programs that will be housed here. I want to congratulate the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, the design teams, and the contractors on the completion of this beautiful building. And thank you all for joining us here today to celebrate this momentous occasion. Thank you.
We want you to stay for our official opening now.
Will you stand here?
Please. Thank you so much, Fred. I'd like you to stay right here with me as we finally reach the moment that we've all been waiting for, the official opening and dedication of this magnificent new center of scholarship. I would like to ask everyone to direct your attention toward the front of the library, and please join me as we count down to the unveiling of the words that adorn this building's beautiful facade. We will count down from 3, drop the curtain, and then everyone should let forth a resounding set of 3 huzzahs. For those of you who don't know about huzzahs, it is a popular 18th century cheer which was well known to General Washington and the men of the Continental Army. So, drum roll, please. Fred, please join me. 3, 2, 1. Hip, hip, huzzah! Hip, hip, huzzah! Hip, hip, huzzah!
Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Robert F. McDonnell, the 71st Governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and good morning. And for those of you not from Virginia, welcome to the Mother of Presidents, the cradle of democracy, the Commonwealth of Virginia. It is a remarkably great day for our Commonwealth, and personally inspiring to me for a couple reasons. One is I get to be the warm-up act for Amy Grant and Vince Gill. What a treat for me. I've admired their music for a long time. But secondly is I grew up just about a mile down the road. Still have a house in the family for 50 years that my parents owned. My mom worked here for 18 years for the great director Jim Rees. I spent a lot of time as a kid on these premises learning about the great indispensable man, George Washington. My mom and dad served on the board here at Mount Vernon, thanks to Governor Allen appointing them many years ago. And so this is a remarkable and special place, not only for my family, but I think for all 8.2 million people in Virginia that we celebrate today, 214 years late, the opening of the Center for the Study of George Washington. This is a man that was extraordinary in the life of our country. And I want to say to the ladies who have maintained the life and legacy and been the lover and custodian of the great things about our first president now for 160 years, thank you for everything that you've done. And so to Ann Bookout and all the vice regents, God bless you for a tremendous 16 decades of taking care of George Washington. And now you've got some help. I want to thank Curt Viebranz and, of course, Jim Rees and all those who have had this privilege of being the executive director of Mount Vernon and working with the ladies and everything they've done to continue to make Mount Vernon the most visited spot in all of Virginia. Over 1 million people walk these hallowed grounds and learn about the great man. I think about the words of Edmund Randolph, the first Attorney General of the United States, the third Attorney General of Virginia. And in that eulogy of George Washington, he perhaps said it best, that this was a man that was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. I think that's why you're all here today. Truly, this inspiring man, while one of eight Virginia presidents, perhaps was the indispensable man, and as you said, that is responsible not only for the victory in the American Revolution, but for those initial tough years in the fledgling democracy to bring a ragtag band of colonists into the great knowledge of self-government and self-rule. It is great, Fred, that you and your team from the foundation have been this amazingly generous, $38 million of the foundational gift for this facility. It's the only library in the country for a president that doesn't take one dime of government money. And I can tell you, with state and federal budgets, that's a big deal today, and I want to thank the private sector and all of those of you who displayed such amazing generosity to make this facility happen. Washington was an extraordinary man for reasons that are well known. He was a surveyor, a businessman, a farmer, a property manager, a great general, a tremendous leader, a congressman, a member of the House of Burgesses, President of the United States for 2 terms, and one of the best whiskey makers in America when he died. That's quite a life in a short period of time. But more than that, he's a remarkable leader. This is a man after the American Revolution that was able to quell a potential coup of the Army by merely taking out a pair of spectacles and putting them on and said, "My eyes have grown tired and I am growing blind because of the service to my country." And at that, a potential insurrection was averted. This was a man who perhaps preserved the Union by getting down on his knees in 1777 and 1778 at Valley Forge. And though he was the leader of the Army, he realized that he had to submit both himself and the goals of the American Revolution to divine providence, to God. And in prayer, this nation was born, and I believe in prayer this nation will be preserved. It's the picture that I have behind my desk at the office and behind my desk at my house to remind me that this was truly a nation that was born because of divine providence. The words of Jefferson immortalized that concept. Washington said that it was impossible to govern without God and the Bible. And so throughout his life, he was a man of quiet faith and a man of immense humility. Governor Kaine, Senator Kaine, reflected that at the mere tender age of 16, he wrote some 100+ lessons about civility. My, what a great country we would be, or even a better country we would be today, if all adhered to those lessons of civility that Washington learned at 16. He also wrote a great book on lessons of leadership. And in that, he talked about faithfulness and humility, a tenet and a character trait that he exemplified throughout all of his jobs as president and as a political leader. The indispensable quality that Jim Collins still said in the book Good to Great today is the true landmark and the two distinguishing fact and trait between great leaders and good leaders. And in his first inaugural address, he said something I believe that is still worthy of repeating because it defines who we are as an American people. That are words that I knew that he believed should be continue to be repeated and reflected on throughout the ages. He said, "The propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal truths of order and right, which heaven itself has ordained." Washington understood there were timeless values that the revolution was fought for, and to the degree that America maintained its fidelity to those principles, we would be a great nation, and to the degree we departed from them, we would be a lesser nation. He was a man that loved veterans, and I know in Virginia we have 837,000, just about more than any other state. We have an amazing 2-century relationship with the United States military that we love and embrace here in the state that's home of the Pentagon. Washington knew that if we did not take care of veterans, we would not be able to have the great men and women come into the service of the country that preserve the liberties that we enjoy today. John Warner, 17 years old, decided to serve in that United States Navy. But Washington said that the willingness with which young people are likely to fight in any war, no matter how justified, shall be directly proportional as to how they perceive that the veterans of earlier wars are treated and appreciated by their nation. We take care of veterans today. We get great men and women to come into the service of the country to fight the battles of tomorrow that will surely come. He understood that, and to the degree that we continue to understand that, we'll have an outstanding United States military to defend the liberties that you and I enjoy and love today. So I'm honored to be here, and on behalf of all the 8.2 million people of Virginia, this is a spectacular day. 214 years after Washington's death, this remarkable facility now will serve as a place where scholars, political leaders can come from all over the country, from all over the world, to study and learn at the footsteps of perhaps the most consequential man ever to walk in Virginia or America. I tell people all the time, if you want to understand America, you need to understand Virginia. If you want to understand Virginia, you need to understand George Washington, because he truly was the man that gave life and voice and breath to this republic in its most challenging times. So thank you for coming. Thank you, Ann and Fred and everybody that had a hand in making this possible. And from this day forward, the legacy and the vision of George Washington will grow ever brighter.
Oh, beautiful, for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. Oh, America, America, God shed His grace on thee and crowned thy with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for patriot dreams that see beyond the years. Thine alabaster cities gleamed, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed His grace on thee and crowned thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea, and crowned thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the founding director of the Fred W. Smith National Library for the Study of George Washington, Dr. Douglas Bradburn.
Madam Regent, Governor, Senators, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. What a beautiful occasion. What a glorious day. It's a dangerous thing to put a professor in front of a captive audience. I'm already off script, so that's good. And I'm about to introduce a man who's forgotten more history than I've ever learned. But I'm still going to give you a little nugget. When Washington died, the lessons to be learned from his life were self-evident to an infant, very young, and insecure country. As one poet wrote only weeks after his death, Washington's, quote, godlike deeds were once the warrior's guide, the statesman's pattern, and the patriot's pride. The tyrant's dread, the pole star of the sage, the poet's theme, and the glory of the age. Now, we don't need godlike heroes anymore. We're a mature country. But we may need to be inspired by human beings, flawed men and women, just like ourselves, who lived through complicated times, revolutionary times, and didn't know what would happen next week and next year, but nevertheless worked for improvement, worked to leave the world a better place than they found it, for a big cause, for the public good. Today, I have the great honor and pleasure of introducing a historian, perhaps better than any other, has been able to draw out the humanity from the marble busts and the false caricatures of our past. He famously believes that history is not the story of events, but the story of people. And very few people have told these stories as well as David Mccullough. From the Johnstown flood to the Panama Canal, from John Adams to Teddy Roosevelt and Harry Truman, David Mccullough has reminded us all just how foolish and how great we can be. As an author and as a public figure, he has achieved the highest honors. Mccullough has received 2 Pulitzer Prizes, 2 National Book Awards, 2 Francis Parkman Prizes, the Los Angeles Times Book Award, the New York Public Library's Literary Lion Award, and many others. In 2006, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award that a U.S. citizen can achieve. His books are published in at least 10 languages, 9 million copies printed, and all of his books are still in print. He's an artist, a husband, a father, and a grandfather. If there'd never been a George Washington, we'd probably have to call him Sir David Mccullough. And we don't want to do that, right? Lady Rosalie. He is, in short, the preeminent storyteller of America. Who better then to give the inaugural lecture at this new Center for the Study of George Washington? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you David Mccullough.
What a day. What a truly great day for our country. And what a lesson to be reminded of. One of the most obvious lessons of the innumerable lessons of history, that very little of consequence is ever accomplished alone. It's a joint effort. And here we see it with all the people who made this major accomplishment happen. America is a joint effort. And the more we remember that, particularly if we hold public office, the better for all of us. And I take it as a very great and obvious, and for me, heart-lifting privilege to be asked to take part today. I also, in thinking about the accomplishments of the Ladies Association of Mount Vernon, and particularly today with seeing how this has all been made to happen, and particularly this week with our government about to close shop, maybe the thought has occurred to you, we should ask the Women's Association of Mount Vernon to take over. One of my favorite historic sites in our country is Carpenters Hall, a very small, beautiful, classic work of Georgian architecture, just a few steps down from Independence Hall, which all too few visitors ever even bother to notice, let alone go into. It's where the First Continental Congress met. And what's so striking about it when you go inside is how small it is. From what minor, seemingly, origins we began from. But also very important is that upstairs, in combination with that room, where that happened, is a library provided by Benjamin Franklin. Just upstream, 14 miles from where we sit today, on our American Acropolis, stands our Capitol, but also the greatest library in the world, the Library of Congress. Nothing like it on earth. A stupendous accomplishment by a free people. And anytime you get a little down about a state of culture or education or opportunity in our country, please remember that there are more public libraries in America today than there are McDonald's. And so now, today, in this beautiful setting, on this magnificent morning, we're opening a library at Mount Vernon. How thrilling, how important, not just because it's long overdue, but because of the influence, the inspiration, the effect, impact that this gathering place, this center of learning, will have on future generations of all people, all kinds, from all over the world. Benjamin West, the painter, reported that once during the Revolutionary War, he had a private conversation with George III, during which he said to the king that if this war ends and America is the victor, George Washington will retire from public life. And George III said, if he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world. And he was. He was. And his shadow, his light, his inspiration extends to our own day. There's no such thing as a self-made man or a self-made woman. It's an expression that should be taken out of the language. We are all the results of parents, teachers, associates, friends, rivals, and we are the result of people we never knew, never met, never can, because they lived hundreds of years before we came on the scene. They've changed our outlook on life. They've provided the very words that we use to speak with. And they provide examples, set an example. It wasn't just that George Washington set an example in his difficult and very dangerous and yet very exciting, promising time. He still sets an example. History is about people. It's not about dates and quotations and provisos and so forth. It's about people. History is human. When, in the course of human events, the operative word there is human. And if you begin to see those who preceded us as human beings, who did not know how everything was going to turn out or how anything was going to turn out, because for them, as for us, there was no such thing as the foreseeable future. Never was, never will be. They did not know they were going to win the Revolutionary War. By all logical, realistic observation, there was almost no chance we could win the Revolutionary War. We had no Navy, we had no Army to speak of, all amateurs in effect, and we had no money. And we were up against the most powerful nation on earth.
who were our people. And yet, we brought it off. A miracle. Call it the hand of God, call it fate, call it luck. A miracle. As was the man who led that turning point in history. Imagine only a 6th grade education, relatively little experience in war, and his first great moment was a flop, a failure. In Pennsylvania, he started the French and Indian War at Fort Necessity. It was a foolish, almost adolescent thing to have done. He made repeated mistakes during the Revolution, but he always learned from his mistakes. And he had the capacity to get up and keep going. When we choose leaders, we should always take a careful look at how they've handled failure, because failure is part of life. Failure is part of history. And it's those people who don't lapse into self-pity or blaming others, but who get back up and keep the faith and keep going. And he's the prime example of that. And he also understood that leadership involves making the right impression, leading by example. George Washington was very concerned with appearances. He cared immensely about his clothing, whether his civilian clothing or his uniform. Everything had to be clean and of fine cloth and beautifully tailored. He cared in detail about every aspect of Mount Vernon. Every room, all the exterior. He was the architect of that building. And he cared deeply about landscape architecture. This was an infinitely interesting man. Yes, he was commander-in-chief for 8 years. Yes, he was commander-in-chief as president for 8 years. In other words, he was commander-in-chief for 16 years. No other American in our history had anything like that impact. But he also was a human being. And while some people say he's very difficult to get to know, I do not feel that way whatsoever. I think that his autobiography is not on paper. His autobiography is in this place. I think this is one of the most important, interesting sites, not just in America, but in the world. And the more we come to this place, the more we look at this place, the more we read into this place, the imprint of his outlook on life and his concern for how things appear, the more we begin to understand why he was the way he was. And of course, equally important to appearances and to how you present yourself as a leader was how you use the language. Now, Washington read much more than people seem to understand. And so, in many respects, it's very helpful and revealing to go and look at what he read and what influenced him. One was the great poem by Alexander Pope, Pope's Essay on Man. He read it through and through. So did virtually all of his generation. But he hadn't gone to Harvard. He hadn't gone to William and Mary. He had learned on his own. And in that magnificent work, there are 2 lines, which they all knew. And we would do well to remember them today. Act well your part. There all the honor lies. Not power, not glory, not fame, not wealth, honor. A word not too many people use anymore, or more discouragingly, don't understand. Our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor, honorable conduct, honorable behavior, off stage and on. He set an example of patriotism, and he set it again and again by understanding what really motivates people. He loved the theater. Act well your part. Fate, history, call it what you will, has cast you in a very lead role. And you have to imagine a historic proscenium around you. And you go on that stage and you play your part as you best possibly can. They all knew this line. It's one of the reasons they tried as best they could to act well their part. And with the attitude that what a chance to be a lead performer in this all-important turning point for the world. It was the idea, the goal, the sense of purpose and achievement that really drove those magnificent people of that day. This tiny little country on the edge of giant wilderness, population of 2,500,000 people, 500,000 of whom were in bondage, slavery. 2 million people would produce that kind of a generation, a miracle. Washington's favorite play by far was Cato, about the Roman statesman by Joseph Addison, another English writer, poet. And in that magnificent play, there is a line that I first saw in something that John Adams wrote to his wife. Keep in mind, in those days, they did not use quotation marks. And the line is, "'Tis not in mortals to command success, but we'll do more. We'll deserve it." And when I read that line, I thought, good God, how different is that attitude from what we have seen in our time by so many in positions of responsibility. And then I was reading something that Washington wrote, and there it was again. And I thought, wait a minute, how can this be? Neither line was quoted. So I started through Bartlett's familiar quotations from the 18th century, and bingo, there it was in the play Cato. But there's more to it than that, and one of the points I want to make, if at all possible, in tribute to George Washington today, is that yes, he was a man of action, if ever there was. And yes, actions speak louder than words, but not always, not always. Words can change history. Words can change the outlook of a generation. It's happened again and again. And words can be what motivate the action. One of the most dramatic and telling and crucial scenes in our history, because it took place in the Revolutionary War, during the Revolutionary War, on December 31st, 1776, the day that all the recruitment of the Continental Army, all they'd signed up for, expired. Every single one of Washington's troops, as of the next day, January 1st, 1877, was free to go home. And Washington called them out in formation at Trenton on December 31st, and he told them the following. He offered a bounty of $10 for all who would stay another 6 months after their enlistments expired. A considerable sum, by the way, at that time. And he had done it without any authorization from Congress. And as he wrote in a letter afterward to the Congress, I thought it no time to stand on trifles. The soldiers were all lined up, and he approached them on his magnificent horse. A commander rides a magnificent horse. And he addressed them, and he said, in the most affectionate manner, that they would get $10. And those willing to stay were told to step forward. The drums rolled. Imagine this scene. The drums rolled. Minutes passed, and not one man stepped forward. Not one. Now, Washington's just faced defeat. He's made his appeal. They turned him down. What does he do? He turns on the horse, rides off a little bit, collects himself, turns the horse about, and approaches them again. If that didn't work, I'll try something else. He said the following: "My brave fellows, you have done all I asked you to do and more than could be reasonably expected. But your country is at stake, your wives, your houses, and all that you hold dear. You have worn yourselves out with fatigues and hardships, but we know not how to spare you. If you will consent to stay 1 month longer, you will render that service to the cause of liberty and to your country, which you can probably never do under any other circumstance." Again, the drums sounded. The men began stepping forward. As Nathaniel Green wrote, God Almighty inclined their hearts to listen to the proposal, and they engaged anew. Great moment. Breathtaking moment. Really happened. It's not some playwright's concoction. However, there was a playwright in the background, William Shakespeare, whom Washington also read. You'll remember Henry V. "This story shall the good man teach his son. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, England, gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here. You are lucky to be here. You are lucky to be able to help your country." And he says, "You will render a service to the cause of liberty and to your country, which you can probably never do under any other circumstance." Same idea. Now, I can't prove, no one can prove that he drew it from that, but surely that's what it is. I feel that we need to know more, much more, about the individuals who have shaped our nation. And I don't mean just the politicians or the military people, the heroes of our wars and struggles. I mean all the extraordinary people who have shaped our culture, who've created what we believe in, what we're willing to work hard for, and what we still aspire to achieve in improvement. In the second line of God Bless America, which we didn't sing today or hear today, it says, "America, America, God shed his grace on thee. And God mend thine every flaw. God mend thine every flaw. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law." Washington was a man of immense self-control, who believed in liberty in law, who believed in education. And I can't imagine what the effect could be on him today, knowing this had been created. It's long past, but from now on, let there be no doubt that this was a human being deserving infinite study, because we need to know more about all of those eminent deceased from whom we've learned and been given so much. And we can never, ever know enough about George Washington. I want to close with a line from Swift. He loved Jonathan Swift. "May we live all the days of our life."
So now, Fred, I have to follow David Mccullough. So, thank you, David, very much for those remarks, and especially for the closing. And our view is, as yours is, that there is so much more to know. I'm grateful you are all here today for this signature moment in Mount Vernon history. If he were here today, he would be humbled by this, but I'm sure he would be pleased by the approbation that all of you have afforded him here today. And so we are really deeply grateful that you have taken time today to come to celebrate this moment with us here. I will say that you're welcome now to take a quick peek inside the library. You should also know, I'm meant to give this plug for our curatorial staff, that your ticket allows you access to the estate. You can visit the mansion, and I especially commend you the new temporary exhibition, Washington the Reader Take Note, which has opened today in our museum. So thank you very much for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today for our special ceremony. We ask that you please remain seated until our platform party has departed the stage. And thank you all.